we're just on time to really explore remapping our lives. And yes, I've remapped my life a few times. You know, as you mentioned in the introduction, as a school teacher in London, I was just very dissatisfied with my work life. You know, I loved the kids. I loved being able to share knowledge, but there was an inner yearning, an inner calling to be of service in a new way. And interestingly, I didn't know what that would look like. And I think that's one of the first things I want to share with people is, like, you really don't need to know the exact thing that you want to do next. You really don't need to know what the new map is going to look like. I had no idea that I would go on to move countries, set up a coaching business, travel the world, now host clients on retreat here. I had no idea. And in fact, if I had been the one to come up with what I was going to do next, I don't think I'd have given myself permission to do something quite as courageous as that, something quite as glamorous as that. I probably, in my mind, would have come up with just another job in London. And so I think when we talk about remapping our lives, we really want to be gentle with ourselves. You don't have to have it all mapped out. But what's very helpful is that you listen to that inner call. I use the term wisdom. Some people use the term clarity. Some of you might use the term desires. And that inner call generally isn't the entire plan. That inner call is generally what's pulling me forward, what's next. And so for me, back then as a teacher, it was, oh God, I want to do something other than this. I want to have something a lot more expansive and enjoyable than this. And so again, you know, that's one of the first things you want to take into consideration when we're remapping our life. Beyond that kind of initial experience with my career and changing over to become a coach, and then beginning to travel the world, seeing clients all over, and then moving forward to bringing clients to Italy. Beyond that, obviously, I've been faced now with a whole new remapping of my life. And that new remapping has come through not a desire, but actually something unwanted. The death of my fiancé very suddenly back in December. And so I find myself again in this place where I'm navigating the unknown, but I'm feeling a lot of trust, regardless of an uncertain direction. And so this is the second point I want to make for people is, you know, when we're remapping our lives, there is a level of uncertainty and unknown that is very, very helpful. There's a level of the unknown and delving into it that we have to embrace if we want to have a new life, if we want to move forward. And sometimes, like in the case of the death of Francesco, it's an unwanted situation where you're forced into a remapping. And what I notice about myself in this period of time, Anne-Marie, is just there's a lack of fear. And that really surprises me, that in the face of such loss, that we can have loss and we can have uncertainty, but that the fear is optional. You know, freaking out is optional. Getting yourself in a spin and a tizzy about it and, you know, screaming and kicking, wanting the past to be back again is optional. And I find that when I work with clients, the less they're in that experience of scaring themselves with their thinking, the more they're able to remap their lives and navigate the unknown with a certain level of grace, a certain graceful transition and movement, a dance almost. And it's not to take away from the terrible experiences that people are having today, whether they're losing jobs or losing loved ones or losing income. It's just to say that putting a gun to our head about the situation is something that we have learned to do, but it's completely optional. It does not help you remap. Now, many people listening are probably saying, yes, Grace, I know that, I do that, and I know it's not helpful, but I can't help it. Well, it's human nature, right? But the more we start catching ourselves, putting the gun to our head, scaring ourselves about the future, scaring ourselves about the change we need to make, the more we catch that, and we often catch it through how we feel, Anne-Marie, the more we catch that, the less inclined we are to be seduced by it. Is this making sense at all? I just love to check in rather than keep babbling on.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
So I think people have kind of innocently learned, and me too, innocently learned, if I scare myself enough, then I'll make a change. If I worry enough, then things will be different. Then somehow everything that needs to happen will happen more easily. And that's not the case. It's an innocent learned habit, but it is something that we want to catch more and more as we begin to remap our lives. So please feel free to question what you're hearing, what you'd like to pick up on. I'm great with questions.
The only thing that occurs to me, and it is different, the only thing I've had an experience that was similar to what you experienced is that I lost my father at a relatively young age, very suddenly. He was an older father, he was a lot older than my mother. And I did go into a bit of a downward spiral, and I was an only child, and I ended up in a relationship for longer than I should have as a result of that, or I put it as a result of that. This is before I knew about the 3 principles. So how do you, from your experience, and I don't know what other experience you've had of bereavement, how do you feel that you could keep on track when you're in the midst of grief mentally?
That's a beautiful question. Well, I guess what I have seen throughout this period of time is that the more I allow the experience, whether it's the sadness or the regret or the worry about the future, the more I sort of allow the experience to flow through, the less I get stuck there. Now, one of the things that really surprised me, Anne-Marie, is the fact that we can have grief without extra layers of suffering. That really shocked me, because you see, I thought that the world was just going to come crashing down completely, and I was never going to be able to pick myself up off the floor. And those extra layers of suffering, which I've mentioned earlier, scaring ourselves, worrying too much, living in feelings of regret, living in feelings of what if, those levels of suffering tend to leave us worse off than we need to be. Again, they're optional. And as we allow the experience of loss to occur, as we allow the feelings to come and go, and as Sydney Banks, for those of you familiar with the 3 principles, as Sydney Banks said, if the only thing we ever learn is not to be afraid of our experience, that alone would change the world. As we allow those feelings to come and go without layers of being afraid, interestingly, they pass on. And I really saw something deeply about the role of state of mind where grief and loss is concerned. I began to see, or track, as you use that word, Anne-Marie, I began to track that my experience of loss was so much heavier when I was in a low state of mind, when I was tired, when I hadn't slept well, when the elevator of consciousness had just dropped down so much. And then what ultimately surprised me was the level of loving feelings I was living in